Do you have investment properties you're considering selling and would like to learn how to defer the tax consequences? Then you need to call Equity Advantage and learn about a 1031 exchange. A 1031 exchange is a powerful investment tool. It enables you to keep a property's equity intact when it's used to acquire like-kind replacement property of equal or greater value and equity, even if you recently acquired the property. For over 30 years, Equity Advantage has been providing investors solutions for deferring taxes and maximizing the value of investments through a 1031 exchange. At Equity Advantage, we don't sell investments, but rather provide the tax deferment tools and expertise to facilitate their sale and transfer. Learn more by going to 1031exchange.com. or Google YouTube Equity Advantage for in-depth videos. Listen, you've worked hard for the money in your investments. Equity Advantage works hard to keep it yours.
Learn more about 1031 exchanges and Equity Advantage at 1031exchange.com. That's 1031exchange.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you on what we like to call Conspiracy Theory Thursday. So think about this conspiracy, and I'll get into the details in a moment. Should illegal aliens be able to go to college free on your dime as an American citizen and an American taxpayer? I'll tell you where that's happening in just a moment. First, welcome to the program. If you want to jump into the best conversation in talk journalism, it happens right here every weekday at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. If you happen to be a naysayer, that's what we call people who disagree with my point of view. You're not filtered out. No, you go right to the head of the line. We're going to put you in as an naysayer, and you get to go first. But be sure to have your argument together. I'm glad to talk to a good naysayer who can actually give me a run for my money when it comes to talking about things like that. Should illegal aliens get free college tuition? They not only get to come into the country without any kind of consequence at all, and they're breaking our laws because Joe Biden says so, and now they get to go to college for free? Again, I'll get the details in a moment. But I want to welcome our newest Lars Talk affiliate. A big welcome to affiliate KIDO, Talk Radio 107.5 FM and 580 AM in Boise, Idaho. Glad to have you on board. Always glad to talk to Kevin Miller, who does the morning show there. It's always fun to talk to Kevin, and I see him from time to time at industry events. But let me tell you what else is going on this hour. Has America lost its greatest country in the world title, like my upcoming guest claims? And I might just push back on that just a bit. Did the Supreme Court create an environmental disaster in the wake of the Clean Water Act decision, or did they put the Biden EPA back into its constitutional lane? And I want you to take just a moment to vote in our Twitter poll. It might be habit forming, but it doesn't cost anything. We usually try to take a question from the stories of the day and pose it to you where you can just vote on it. We know that some people like to call, some people like to listen, some people like to vote in the Twitter poll, some people send me emails at talk@larslarson.com. Will you boycott Chick-fil-A for going woke? Now, I'm a fan of Chick-fil-A. I have no dog in the fight. I don't do commercials for them. I don't know anybody who owns the stock or serves in important positions within Chick-fil-A. But I've always got a kick out of their advertising. I like their food. The lines are usually too long, but that's just telling you the marketplace thinks their food is fantastic. But consider this, as the New York Post put it, Chick-fil-A, the chicken sandwich chain long beloved by conservatives, and that's absolutely true, for its long-standing opposition to same-sex marriage, is sparking boycott calls after announcing it has hired an executive in charge of diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI is an idea that I think is blatantly racist and illegal and unconstitutional, but that's just my point of view. Now, I also want to tell you, before I tell you the other background on this, I don't sponsor boycotts. I never have. In a quarter century of doing talk radio, I've never sponsored a boycott. I will tell people how I plan to spend my money. I do encourage people to make their own decisions to vote with your pocketbook or wallet or whatever you want to call it, wherever you keep your money. I say to people, spend the money with the people that you agree with. Don't spend money with people who are trying to take your rights away. The Atlanta-based company named Eric McReynolds as its post of vice president of DEI. Social media users took note of it in some recent days, and that has brought some angry denunciations on Twitter from conservatives who allege that the firm has gone woke. Now, I want to remind you of something. A number of years ago, one of the owners of Chick-fil-A, chose to make a personal contribution from his own money. It's his money. And he wanted to give money to faith-based groups. Now, many of those faith-based groups do not support gay marriage. Many of those faith-based groups do not support the transgender nonsense and all that. But why would Chick-fil-A do this? I think it's because when they had that experience of the public reaction, not just the public reaction, but the special interest group reaction to when that executive gave some money of his own accord, which he has every right to do. Under the Constitution, he has a right to free speech, and if he chooses to support the free speech of faith-based groups, everybody, whether you agree with him or not, should say that man or that woman has a right to give money to the causes he believes in. And giving to faith-based groups doesn't get much better than that. But with all the controversies recently, Bud Light taking itself down the tube, sales down like 25%, Target, total value of the company down 12 or 13 billion and counting. Kohl's department stores, they're in trouble as well. Disney is still following this crazy woke nonsense, and they're going right over a cliff by spitting right in the face of American families that they depend on to bring their kids, not just to the theme parks, the amusement parks in Florida and in California, but to buy all those Disney costumes and buy all the Disney movie tickets and listen to the music and everything else. Corporate America's embrace of DEI, as the Post puts it, which seeks to diversify workforces, has been criticized by conservatives who claim it's discrimination. How could it be anything else? If you have two people you're considering for a job and you decide which one gets the job and which one does not, based on anything other than skill and merit, then you're wrong. And if you say, why, this is the better worker, but I'm going to choose this worker because this worker is a person of color, or this person is gay or lesbian or transgender or Q or T or all the other, that thing gets longer and longer every week. If you tell me as an employer that you're choosing somebody based on their skin color, their sexuality, their ethnicity, the place they go to church, or the fact that they don't go to church, then you are breaking federal law, you're breaking state law, and you are violating the very precepts of the U.S. Constitution. And I've volunteered this to you before, that I have great producers. I have two of them right now. Usually I have three. We're going to hire another one. I think we got an eye on the person who's going to do the job. I have men. I have women. We've actually offered the job to a young lady who was a person of color. She turned it down, didn't want to work for me. That's okay. I don't hold that against her. She has a right to decide where she wants to work. And I didn't pick her because she was a person of color. I picked her because she seemed to have the capability to do the job, which is the only criteria you should use. If Chick-fil-A is saying we are now going to start adding people to our workforce, not based on skill and talent and merit, not based on the content of their character, as Dr. King used to say, but based on the color of their skin, they are breaking the law. They are doing something that is immoral. They're doing something that's illegal, and they're doing something that is unconstitutional. In that case, I have already eaten my last Chick-fil-A sandwich. I won't be going back there. That's why conservatives are reacting that way. Let me spend just a moment, though, telling you what's going on. In Minnesota, they have now decided that illegal aliens will be eligible for the state's new tuition-free college program. Democrats used their majority in the legislature to add a number of state benefits for illegal aliens: driver's licenses, Medicaid, publicly run insurance programs for the poor, and a free college. Like Joe Biden inviting illegal aliens to come in isn't bad enough. Minnesota's going to double down on it. Coming up in a moment, why is the Supreme Court's unanimous ruling that slapped down the EPA a big win for democracy and American property rights? We'll get into. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. When I described the Supreme Court's decision, and it was an incredible one, 9-0, deciding that the EPA had just run roughshod over this nice couple. I don't know them personally, but I've talked to their lawyers in Idaho, who years ago wanted to build their dream house on a piece of land. And they got all the permits, and they started construction, and in came the EPA. and said, you are close to a ditch, and that ditch runs to a creek, and the creek runs to a river, and the river runs into a lake, and despite all that distance, you are operating in a wetlands. And under Barack Hussein Obama's interpretation of the phrase waters of the United States, under the Clean Water Act, you are not allowed to build here. You are on a wetlands. And their land was not a wetlands. But, you know, the EPA has all this authority that they claim, not authority that was actually written into the law that created the EPA. So this one went to the Supreme Court. And amazingly enough, all 9 justices said, nope, the landowners are right, the EPA is wrong. And our friend Bob Barr, former member of Congress, now the first vice president of the board for the NRA and former CIA as well, is here to tell us why this is a huge win for democracy. Bob, welcome back.
Thank you, Lars. Great to be with you. This is truly a historic victory. You know, the court doesn't often get it right on point, but this time they did. And the most amazing thing about it is that there was none of the 9 justices dissented. That has to tell the American people something and give them a little bit of hope for the future.
Well, and in fact, does it tell them that in some ways the Congress, the body you used to be a member of, was not doing its job? Because the EPA went out and ran around saying, well, when Congress created us, we were allowed to go out and create any new rules we want, even if they went way past our mandate. I would say Congress should have said, hey, EPA, you can't do that. We authorize you to do so much and no more. And if you want more authority, come back to us and ask. They never did that, and the Congress never called them. As a former member of Congress, can you weigh in on that, on why the Congress isn't willing to rein in some of these out-of-control federal agencies?
You know, Lars, you have a knack for encapsulating a problem in a way that makes a lot of sense and is extremely accurate.
Thank you.
One thing that I noticed even before I got to the Congress in working on legal issues as a private attorney was that the Congress, whether they're Democrat or Republican controlled, they like to pass these very broadly worded statutes that sound great, but they don't want to do the hard work of defining the issues and limiting the jurisdiction. What they would rather do is pass a very broad law like the Clean Water Act back in 1972, leave it up to the bureaucrats, and then when and if the bureaucrats go too far and the people of this country object to it, then the Congress can come forward and say, oh, we're going to save the day. Well, they created the problem in the first place. You are absolutely right, particularly on wetlands and on waterways of the United States. The Congress failed to do its job, not just once, not just twice, but repeatedly over the last half century.
See, and what I don't understand about this, Bob, I was trying to think about how this would apply at a small scale. So if Bob Barr and Lars Larson owned a convenience store, and we said, well, we don't want to stand behind the counter all day long. We're going to hire a really good manager. So we tell the manager, you're in charge, and you have 2 or 3 other employees who work with you and the weekend people and all that, but you're in charge. If we heard the first inkling that the manager was doing crazy stuff, if we heard, hey, the manager got angry at a customer and beat the daylights out of him, we'd say, okay, we may fire him, but at the very least, we're going to call him on the carpet, and we're going to fix this right now. We wouldn't let decades go by, while we heard about all the bad things the manager we had hired. The EPA is supposed to be sort of a manager of the environment, a manager of the clean waters and air pollution and all that. When the owners, or the owners' representatives in the case of Congress, hear that the manager of clean waters has been going nuts with their authority, thinking they've got authority from God or something, and that they're just going nuts with that authority, why in the world don't they do their job?
Well, they don't do their job because they're not really accountable like you or I or others would be in the private sector. Government officials, whether they're in the Congress or in the executive branch, they're not really held accountable, and they don't do anything unless they absolutely have to. Even though the EPA has gotten the brunt of the criticism, well-deserved here, the Corps of Engineers is in some ways even worse because what they can do, the Corps of Engineers, which shares jurisdiction over wetlands and waterways with the EPA, they can come in, to the minutest degree. If you have, as we have in Georgia, a number of man-made lakes, and severely restrict anything you can do on any land near that lake. So it's the Corps of Engineers and the EPA that sort of are a 1-2 punch that has for 50 years, Lars, been engaged in a war on private property in this country. And thank goodness the Supreme Court has finally decided to at least put a limitation on it, not necessarily a hard stop, but it's a start.
Well, and Bob, I would say this seems to be a pathology that exists throughout the federal bureaucracy, because it won't surprise you that almost every week we have somebody on to talk about an issue involving a federal agency. The Forest Service has been, we've said the Forest Service is out of control on, and we've got specific cases. National Marine Fisheries, even obscure agencies that most of the public has never heard of unless they happen to be in the fishing business, they're going crazy. And these guys and gals, the folks who run these agencies, seem to think we can't be fired, we won't be disciplined, they won't cut our budget. Nobody, and it's not just, as you said, the EPA, it's the FBI. I mean, for all I know, it's your old outfit, the CIA, and that they've all gone crazy on this authority, and they have decided to go as far as they possibly can. Like every day they wake up and say, "Well, I'm going to work. Who am I going to harass today?" And I wish we could, as citizens, say, wow, there are all these federal agencies. They know the lane they should stay within, and they're there to help make it a better country. Instead, they seem to just say, how far can we get today before somebody hauls us up short, like the Supreme Court, and metaphorically lays a 2x4 upside our head?
And the Sacketts, the plaintiffs in this case that just came down, they were lucky because they had a conservative public interest legal foundation, the Pacific Legal Foundation, to help them. The vast majority of citizens of this country who are harassed by the EPA, the Corps of Engineers, and these others, they don't have the time or the money to fight these years, decades-long battles. Thank goodness for public interest law firms like the Pacific Legal Foundation that will take up these issues for American citizens who themselves cannot afford to fight the Goliath that is the federal government.
And by the way, Bob, I admire some of the things the Corps has done, but I've also talked about the excesses of the Corps. There was a farmer about 5 years ago that I talked to, and he said, "You're not going to believe what happened. There was a flood." And I said, "I heard there was a flood in your area." And he said, "Yeah, it took about a quarter acre of some of my farmland." And I said, "Well, why don't you, fix that?" And he said, "Because the Corps of Engineers says I can't put riprap down, rocks down, basically, to stop." In fact, he said, "I did put some rocks and hay in there, and now they're threatening to hit me with gigantic fines." And I said, "Well, what's going to happen?" He says, if I can't stop this erosion, the regular flooding in the creek and all that, it's probably going to take 4 or 5 acres of my land." And he says, "I can't afford that. I'll be out of business as a farmer." And you'd think, why doesn't this agency say, we're going to help you out, and we'll show you the right way to do it, or we'll suggest some right ways to do it, because we want to protect your land as well, and we don't want to see your topsoil going down the river to the ocean. But I almost never hear about the agencies helping. I always hear about them hurting. Bob, I appreciate you coming on every week. And again, congrats again on your election as first vice president of the board at the NRA.
Thank you, Lars.
It is my pleasure. That is Bob Barr, former CIA analyst, member of Congress, newly elected to the NRA Board of Directors. Coming up, the liberal elite's true colors have started to shine on through, encouraging the elimination of publicly funded police and then starting their own for-profit private security businesses. I'll tell you the story coming up next. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's what we have called for decades Conspiracy Theory Thursday. And we called it that because it just seemed to me that every Thursday I heard about crazy conspiracy theories and some sensible ones as well. And I'm going to tell you about one that is absolutely, it would take the cake. In fact, if a conservative was doing it, he would be condemned by the left. They would say, why? He's only engineered this whole disaster for American citizens so he can make a bunch of money. But because it's being done by the guy who helped to co-found the site eBay, and he has lots and lots of money. Apparently, it's okay in their view. But let me get to that in a moment. First, welcome to the Lars Larson Show. A pleasure to take your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. And if you happen to be a naysayer, you disagree with me on whatever it is we're talking about or something you'd like to raise as an issue on the program, it's 866-439-5277. And naysayers, they go right to the head of the line. You can also send emails to talk@larslarson.com. You can vote in our Twitter poll. And today's poll has to do with this. Chick-fil-A, the chicken sandwich chain, which has been beloved by conservatives, including me. Well, conservatives are not very happy with Chick-fil-A about now because Chick-fil-A has hired a vice president of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And all of that is as racist and biased as the day is long because DEI brings the idea to your workplace or to your company that you should not hire people based on skill and ability. You should hire them based on their skin color, based on their ethnicity, based on their religious faith, based on all those other factors that are under federal and state laws all across America illegal to hire people on the basis of. I mean, I could know more. I've volunteered to you that I usually have 3 great producers. I lost one. I have to replace that producer, and I think I have a new candidate. I have men, I have women, and I would be open to hiring anybody who has the skills and talents and abilities to be one. So I'm not advertising, but I guess if you're interested, send an email. But my point is that if one day I went completely off my nut, maybe I drank whiskey all day long and then smoked medical marijuana, that if I did that, and I told you why, the next person I hire, much the same way Joe Biden did this when he picked his vice president, the person I pick for this job will be a black woman, and that's how I'm going to choose her. You'd say, hold on, Lars, you can't say that. You can't do that. If you do that, it's illegal. You're violating the law. You're violating the Constitution. I would have to admit, you're absolutely right. So that's why I'm never going to do that kind of thing. I'm never going to pick a person to hire as a member of my staff based on their gender, based on who they like to sleep with or what kind of sex they like. I'm not going to pick them based on what church they go to, what faith they practice, or whether they practice faith at all. I mean, maybe someday I'll find an atheist who makes a good producer. I don't imagine that'll happen, but I guess it could. In fact, I think most atheists wouldn't want to work for me because I'm a person of faith. But I would not discriminate against them on that basis. When you say we back DEI and you hire somebody to be the vice president at Chick-fil-A for diversity, equity, and inclusion, you are volunteering to the world that you plan to discriminate against people based on race, based on skin color, based on national origin and faith. And that is not just illegal, it is most importantly immoral as well. A welcome to our newest Lars affiliate, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM and 580 AM in Boise, Idaho. And boy, I love having KIDO on because my good friend Kevin Miller works there, and he's a great talk show host, and I love talking to him every week. But let me tell you about this, because this actually fits into the category of what I would ordinarily consider a conspiracy theory. Imagine if somebody came to you and said, I know, Lars, we can make a lot of money. I mean, mounds of money. And here's how we're going to do it. We talk the politicians into firing as many police as we can convince them to fire. And as you know, over the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen major American cities and even some mid-size American cities fire big chunks of their police force. And then we've seen those same politicians make policing so they have defamed it so badly. They have badmouthed the cops so much that most of the police departments, even offering huge bonuses and financial incentives, cannot find young men and women who want to go to work for them as cops and make being a cop their profession. So they've managed to make the profession toxic. I don't consider it toxic, but that's what the politicians have done, including most especially Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and many of the major figures of the Democrat Party. They have made policing a toxic profession. And the cities, even some of the cities that decided to change course and say, well, maybe getting rid of a lot of the cops was a bad idea, as they saw their murder rates spike and their armed robbery numbers spike and the rapes spike up. and all of a sudden their whole population, the law-abiding population, is under siege from criminality on all sides. And you say, now, once we get them to fire a whole bunch of the cops and make it really hard for them to hire any new cops, then we'll go out and start a company that provides private security, and we're going to make big money. Well, guess what's happening? The billionaire who founded eBay, brilliant idea, site where you can go online and buy just about anything, not guns, but just about anything else. He has started a private security startup company, and he's billing it as Uber for bodyguards. You know what Uber is, ride share, where you want to ride somewhere from point A to point B. You just get on an app on your phone, punch a couple of buttons, and boom, there's a ride there. And it tends to be a much better deal economically than other ways of getting around, like a cab or anything like that. He also, at the same time that he's starting a private security firm known as the Uber for bodyguards, is donating literally millions of dollars to groups that advocated defunding or even abolishing the police. His name is Pierre Omidyar, and his wealth, valued by the Bloomberg Billionaires Index at $8.91 billion as of last Friday, has turned over $500,000 to organizations that protested against the police and in favor of defunding the police. Two other organizations that are part of the Omidyar Network, Policy Link and Democracy Fund, they got $1.3 million to sponsor a website called defundpolice.org. New York Post had the story. A tool used by advocates to call for cuts in police budgets. They donated $300,000 to the fraudulent Movement for Black Lives, an organization that describes itself as an abolitionist coalition, meaning abolish the police. All of that. So imagine the conspiracy theory. Somebody says to you, we're going to first destroy policing and prosecution and conviction of criminals in America, and then we're going to set up private security. And, of course, most of the people who are most at risk of crime, people who are poor, people who are racial minorities, people who live in inner cities, they won't be able to afford it. They're on their own. But the elites will still be protected. Can you imagine the level of hypocrisy there? Now, I want you to consider something else. Father's Day is right around the corner. Get Dad what he really wants. Omaha steaks, perfectly aged, always tender, guaranteed delicious. The Father's Day experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to put a smile on the big guy's face, and I don't mean Joe Biden, this summer with hand-selected packages. Head over to omahasteaks.com and use promo code Lars at checkout and get $30 off your qualifying order. You can choose from a variety of mouth-watering packages. They include fork tender, bacon-wrapped filet mignons, other gourmet grillables like air-chilled boneless chicken breasts, burgers, jumbo franks, and a whole lot more. And don't forget to save room for dessert. Most gift packages come with 4 delicious caramel apple tartlets. I get hungry just talking about it. Go to omahasteaks.com and use my name, Lars, L-A-R-S, at checkout. You'll save $30 for an unforgettable gift for Father's Day. Because if there's one thing we know, dads want steak. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code Lars at checkout. Minimum order required. See the site for details. That's omahasteaks.com. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Well, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of illegal aliens are storming our border right now to find a better life here, or just make a whole lot more money than they made in their actual home countries. My upcoming guest is fleeing the country. We got to talk to Seton Motley about that. Hey, Seton, welcome back to the program. How are you? Seton, are you there? Did I lose him? Oh, no. That's terrible when you're talking to somebody over an international phone line, and then he drops off the line because his internet service is garbage. I thought garbage for internet service was back here. Let me grab a quick naysayer before. Is Seton there? Okay, I'll go to Seton. We'll get to the naysayer in a moment. Hey, Seton, how are you?
Sorry, I muted it with my face. I apologize.
I was gonna say you need to move to a country with better internet service, don't you?
No, it's actually pretty good. But anyway, yes, go ahead.
All right, so tell me about this. Why are you fleeing the country?
Well, I fled the country. I went through, my job is unfortunate. Now, if I leave the D.C. area, it does create some limitations and some losses in my job, but I can do it anywhere. and I first moved to Maryland because I wanted to be on the Chesapeake Bay, and I was about an hour away from D.C. And Maryland's everything you've heard. It's high taxes, high regulations.
High
It's
crime.
bad.
High crime.
Well, not where I was. Not
Okay.
where I was. Yeah, it's like most places. Baltimore's terrible. D.C. suburb counties are terrible, but not where I was. Anyway,
Okay.
so then when the lockdown started happening, Maryland was going to be awful, and so I moved to Florida. And then Irma flooded my house and destroyed it, and I lived in allegedly free Florida and allegedly conservative Collier County, which is Byron Donalds is the representative down there.
Good choice.
And well, except when I went to build my house, the county building regulations were insane. I conservatively estimate I wasted $100,000 on the build, meeting regulations that made no building sense. Now, remember, first of all, I'm going to be living in the house. Who cares more about it being safe than me? That's the first thing. But what happens is, this happens all over the country. The plumbers union goes to the county, bribes the county, and in exchange, the county mandates all these idiotic plumbing regulations that make no sense, except they're expensive, and you have to hire plumbers to do them. Then the electricians go in and bribe the county, and the county requires all these electrical mandates that make no building sense, and on and on and on and on and on. So I was priced out of my house between the second mortgage after the flood and the price of the build of the house. I then sold and went to Texas. My property tax, I have a 2,400 square foot house on less than 0.8 of an acre in the middle of nowhere between Austin and San Antonio, and my property tax next year is $8,000.
Ouch.
Now, this is an allegedly conservative Texas and allegedly conservative Comal County. So I'm going to all the places that are allegedly free, and as I say in the piece, the people moving from the likes of California and New York to Texas and Florida are choosing from amongst the lesser of 50 evils. Now, I come to Belize. I'm still trying to sell my house, and I got to sell it quickly in Texas because I don't want to pay the property tax. I come to Belize. I buy 85 feet of Caribbean waterfront, and the property tax is $10 a year.
Wow. Now you have arrived. Hold on, since I want to tell people, Seton is the head of a group called Less Government, and you have arrived at the place where if your taxes for waterfront are $10, you've probably got as little government as you can actually get by with, haven't you?
Well, there's some government. It's very corrupt, just like the U.S., but is so infinitesimally small compared to the U.S. I mean, we're debating whether to spend $5 or $6 trillion a year at just the federal level. This government is tiny. There are some big taxes. The gas tax is about 40%. There's some big import taxes, which is ridiculous because they don't make anything here. They grow food here, but they don't make anything here. So putting a big import tax is kind of dumb. But they do that. And there's a GST, general sales tax, of 12.5%. But the cost of living down here is so much lower because the government is so much smaller, and it's just on an everyday basis. You can feel it in everything you do. There are no speeding tickets in Belize. I was driving back from the capital of the state of Stan Creek, called Dangriga. It's about an hour. I was doing 90 miles an hour on the Southern Highway.
Yeah.
And I looked to my left, and blowing by me, like I'm standing still, is the same bike police truck. The policeman blew by me, and they recognized me and my car and my dog, and waved as they went by me on the way back to the Placentia Peninsula where I live.
Now that's small town stuff. I love that.
Yo, it's fantastic. Listen, everybody is happy. Everybody, there's a bunch of different languages down here, but everybody speaks English because they teach it in the schools. It's a residual from it was a British colony till 1981. The Queen is still on all the money. And the schools are real schools. They're great schools. They wear uniforms. They teach English. They teach money. They teach accounting. They teach real stuff. And these kids are intelligent, and they grow up to be intelligent adults. And it's just completely. And by the way, no one in Belize thinks men can get pregnant. Go ahead.
I want to ask you: is there any way to transplant some of that same impetus to small government to some place in America, get a couple of big counties in an otherwise conservative state and rename them as John Galt County, and say,
well, the
we
problem
will
is
be.
you're still under the umbrella of the federal government.
That's true. That is true.
I mean, that's why in seventh grade I wrote a history paper saying that the South, that Abe Lincoln was a war criminal, and that the South had every right to secede, and you can't shoot at them to make them stay. And I was trying to, even then in seventh grade, I was 13 years old. I was trying to say that, we probably might, we need to have the right idea about secession because we might need it again in the future. And look, the federal government's $32 trillion in debt. It's $200 trillion short on future liabilities like Social Security and Medicare in the next 30 years. I'm not a math major, but that seems to be impossible to pay back. And any conservative who says, let's take the country back, I'm like, why would you want that back? It reminds me of a line from Everybody Loves Raymond. Someone refers to Ray's mom as a trophy wife, and his father says, what contest in hell did I win? But that's the way if we took back control of D.C., look at what we're inheriting.
That's a very good point. That's Seton Motley, the president of Less Government, who's traveling a bit these days or has traveled these days. Glad to get your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Are you part of the Great Resignation, that mass exodus of people who are leaving their jobs to start something new? Then something you need to consider is what to do with your company 401k. Rather than just rolling it over, consider opening a truly self-directed IRA. With a self-directed IRA, a truly self-directed IRA, your retirement portfolio can include real estate, precious metals, cryptocurrency, notes, loans, a new business, and traditional equities like stocks and bonds. You can make any investment the law allows with a truly self-directed retirement account. Listen, you probably have questions, so why not take the time to get the answers? Start with going to IRAadvantage.com. Then talk to the truly self-directed IRA professionals at IRA Advantage.
Would you like to learn more about truly self-directed IRAs? Then visit IRAadvantage.com, view our videos, and call IRA Advantage. Let us set up a truly self-directed IRA for you. That's IRAadvantage.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's Conspiracy Theory Thursday, and it's honestly provocative talk for the United States of America. And you're welcome to take part. We invite your phone calls at 866-HEY-LARS. And if you happen to be a naysayer, well, you'll go right to the head of the line. I'm going to jump to a naysayer here in a moment. First, let me tell you what today's Twitter poll is. Will you boycott Chick-fil-A for going woke? As you may know, conservatives love Chick-fil-A, and I include myself in that group. Have I had their sandwiches? Yes. Do I have a dog in the fight any other way? No. But when they decide to hire a vice president of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I understand why people have said they're going to spend their money elsewhere, and I will join them in doing that. I don't sponsor boycotts, because I know that you're smart enough to make your own decision about where to spend your dollars and where not to spend your dollars. But will you boycott Chick-fil-A for going woke? I would say yes to that. You can vote any way you like. At Lars Larson Show. That's one place to find it. Or LarsLarson.com. Brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC has conservative values like the ones I believe in. So I joined years ago. You can join too. Just go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC is better. Better for you and better for America. Yesterday, based on the fact that 2 small children have died in different places in America over just the last week, and we're only, well, officially, we're not even into summer yet. We're going to be very soon. But I see these stories every single year, and it makes me wonder all the time if somebody is put in charge of a small child. I've been at various times the one person that my granddaughter, who's now 7, she needs less supervision, but she is still under the watchful eye of an adult at all times. Why? Because kids can get into trouble and kids can get hurt. So, when any child dies in any hot car, should somebody face a criminal charge? I said yes, and 93% of you joined me in that yes vote. Only 7% of you said no. But there are a lot of other things to talk about, and I wanted to see what my naysayer, Mike, has to say. Mike, welcome to the program. This program loves naysayers. Where do you and I disagree today?
Am I Mike?
I don't know. Are you Mike?
No, I'm Marsden.
Marsden. Okay, Marsden. What
just
do you and
Mars.
I disagree
I'll
about
just
today?
say, generally speaking, we agree. But on your comments on the founder of eBay, who formed his own security company,
Yeah.
you called him a hypocrite.
Yeah.
I don't think he's a hypocrite at all. He's consistent. He's throwing his money. It's advertising money. He's throwing his money at groups that are going to defund the police, and he's going to be able to make money selling his security system. So I don't think he's a hypocrite at all.
Well, hold on. Just so people understand, this is a story I talked about a bit ago, in which the man who founded eBay, who's a billionaire because it was a smart kind of company to form and they obviously ran it right, he made billions of dollars, about $8.9 billion at latest estimate. He gave a lot of money to groups that advocated for defunding the police and reducing police in cities across America. And now he's starting a private security company that will take advantage of the crime and the violence that has come as a result of that. How is that not hypocritical?
That's not hypocritical at all. He spent money at advertising money. So people are going to do his dirty work for him, and he's going to benefit from that.
Well, I don't know that I buy that, because advertising is one thing. But when you advocate for public policy changes, you're not just saying, hey, I've got a great new service. He's saying, take the police away from everyone in America. And those groups took his money and advocated for exactly that. And when crime began to predictably go up and go out of control, he then said, now that people want private security, those people who can afford his service will be able to get the service that was taken away from them. Now, let's go to Jim, who's also a naysayer. Jim, it's a wealth of naysayers today. What's on your mind, and what do you and I disagree about today?
Low-flow toilets. The other day, you were kind of mocking the low-flow toilet math, and I want to share something with you.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, there are, about 350 million people in the United States.
Roughly, yep.
So let's just, and on average, I was in the Navy for many years. The sewage department was under my umbrella. The average person goes to the bathroom, number one, 3 times a day, and number 2, once a day.
Sounds about right.
Take the math, okay? So you take the math, and the old toilets were about 3 gallons in the tank, and now these are 1.6. So let's just round it off and just say they're saving 2 gallons per time that you're going, number one. Number 2, we got to flush twice. I won't argue that. But number 1, you're saving about 2 gallons. That's about 6 gallons per person per day. That would be about 9 billion gallons of water a day in the United States.
Yep.
That's why I say the low-flow toilets work.
Well, except for this. When you flush, I have great respect for plumbers because they make all that stuff go away. And the way it goes away, the way it's carried away is on water. So, with the number 1, as you put it, it goes away pretty much on its own. Number 2 has to be carried away. What I had heard from friends in Canada was they don't believe in the low-flow toilets because they think they create plumbing problems, because you've said we can get rid of this stuff and use a lot less water to carry it away. Now, in many parts of America, water is in short supply. But in a lot of other parts, I live in a place that's notorious for raining most of the year. And so you say, why are we saving that? When you say save it, if you save food, it's because you have to create the food, and then you get to eat the food, and then, of course, you dispose of it through the first problem we were talking about. But with water, water keeps coming back. You flush it down, it goes to the ocean, becomes the most useless substance on Earth, evaporates, and comes back as more fresh water. Tell me why it's smart to do that. I mean, and that was the point I was making. The Canadians were laughing, saying, Lars, we don't agree with that low-flow toilet thing. because you're creating plumbing problems for yourself that will take even more water to resolve.
Yeah, when I was in Canada, I don't think they were using low flow toilets.
They weren't. In fact, it's illegal to put, as I was told by the plumbers I ran into in Canada on a trip there with my wife, because we used to go a couple of times a year. Now that we're not jabbed, the Canadians don't want us, and that's fine. I'll keep my money here. But they said, you can't legally put an American-style low-flow toilet in because we think they create plumbing problems. Do you think they do?
Well, I don't think so, because as you know, I was working in the plumbing industry, and I don't remember having rotor-rooter problems because there wasn't enough water. Now, I want to say, if I remember right, I believe they have a black water and a gray water system, which we don't.
I don't think so.
Everything
I've
goes
seen
down
there's
the same
black
pipe.
water and gray water on most ships and in most RVs. I've never seen a black water and gray water system in a house. I suppose they're possible, but you bring up an interesting point. I'll see if I can find more information for you, Jim. Fascinating call. Haven't had one like that in a while. Back in just a moment. Glad to get your phone calls and your emails. 866 Hey Lars. And coming up, Virginia's become the latest state to send law enforcement down to our southern border. Why are states having to do the federal government's job? Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. And as I always confess to you, for about 25, maybe 26 years, I've been talking about immigration as one of the most threatening issues to American sovereignty that you could ever imagine. And for a long time, people said it's not that big a deal. It's a few people from south of the border coming into the country. They're just migrants. They're just immigrants. And I said, no, if you come to somebody's country illegally, you're not a migrant. You're not an immigrant, just the same way as somebody who comes to my house at my invitation is a guest. Somebody who comes without my invitation is a criminal. Now, Todd Bensman works as Senior National Security Fellow with the Center for Immigration Studies. Todd, welcome back to the program, and thanks for the work you do at CIS.
Great to be here. Thank you.
What should Americans make of the fact that the federal government has effectively abandoned any and all control of the border, and now we see state governors who are sending troops? In the case, the most recent one was Glenn Youngkin from the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Henry McMaster, the governor of South Carolina, have said we're sending National Guard troops. Now, I applaud that somebody's doing something about it. I'm not just dismayed, I'm angry that the federal government, they're only having to do it because the federal government has refused to do its job.
Well, I guess I would just point out how stark the difference is between what the bureaucrats in Washington say they're doing about the border and what is actually happening on the border. The two could not be further divorced or further apart, those two issues. The Biden administration is claiming lately that, they've got all this success, the numbers are down. They've put in this really tough, kind of Trumpian tough immigration control systems, but I'm just coming back from the border. In fact, I'm still in the car right now. I'm not even home yet. And I can tell you that everybody that crosses the border illegally gets in. Nobody's getting removed, expeditiously removed, or put through asylum claims or anything like that, getting rejected for asylum like they promised was going to happen. The family units that I saw coming through all had papers in their folders, which they willingly showed me, that they were being released on their own recognizance again, and that it was an honor system self-report into an ICE officer in a few months at their convenience, assuming they'll ever do it at all. And so what I'm seeing is thousands of people being granted humanitarian permits on the Mexican side and walked across the bridge. And then with entry permits, thousands and thousands and thousands of entry permits, so they don't get counted as an illegal crossing.
So
And
that's allowed the
numbers are
Biden
down.
administration to create the optics that the border's under control and the numbers that are crossing have gone down by merely labeling them as legitimate entrants instead of illegal crossers. But it's the same people.
Exactly. The numbers, the spigot is wide open. They cranked the spigots open to them on those humanitarian entry permits that nobody has ever interviewed for. There's no vetting at all. And 99% of all people that put in for it on their cell phone apps called CBP1 get it. They get it.
And this is, even though by the numbers, you know the numbers because you're at Center for Immigration Studies, the vast majority of those people, maybe as many as 95% or more, do not qualify for a refugee or asylum status, except that determination won't be made perhaps for as long as a decade in the future.
Right. The presumption is that we are giving the presumption of a need for protection to these immigrants without any interview or evidence or even a claim. We're not even asking them to claim it. We're just, or what their story is. We just simply assume that if you are applying for one of these, then you absolutely deserve it, and we grant it by the tens of thousands and then the hundreds of thousands. It's unbelievable that this kind of a thing is.
Well, members of Congress have told me that the sum total of the last 2.5 years, they always like to go fiscal years and others, the 2.5 years of Joe, we've seen about 9 million people cross into the United States. And this is all, Todd, I don't know of a single community in America that says we're long for housing, or we have an excess of school seats in schools, or teachers, or any of the other resources it takes to run communities. And you let 9 million people in, and probably another 9 in the next year and a half or so till the next election. And where are these people going to go? And are they going to be consuming massive amounts of resources that are intended for Americans?
Well, we know that we have an idea of some of the places where they're going, because wherever they go, controversy is erupting over what to do with them and how to pay for them. Every town that you see this happening, more and more are added to the roster, are bitterly complaining about proposals to put them in public school auditoriums, to put them in college dorms, to put them in homeless shelters that are for American homeless, to boot veterans out of their shelters to make room for these, to put them in 5-star hotels and pay for every bit of it for as long as they want us to pay for it. Free medical care. City after city are declaring emergencies and demanding federal bailouts. And we can expect this to only increase in breadth and depth throughout America over the next 2 years. It's already happening. People are feeling this in their school districts. All of a sudden, we have to have a bond election for this sudden new spike in enrollment that nobody tells us who they are or why suddenly we have a new spike, and now we have to pay more taxes for portable classrooms. That's happening all across America too, everywhere. People are feeling this in their municipalities at the local, hyper-local level.
Well, and see, what I keep thinking about is all these communities. Again, Todd, I've not heard of any community that says, wow, we wish we could have another 10,000 people come here because we have lots and lots of room in parks, schools, highways, sewers, water plants, and everything else. And you're right. It's a massive new load. I mean, in a lot of ways, I like to look at it this way. 9 million people, 3 million people would be 1% of the U.S. population is 350 million. So that means we've let in 3% additional to a country that already is stretched on resources. Not that we're not the wealthiest country on earth, but we are. But again, the way it all gets divvied up, I know who's going to take the brunt of it. It won't be the elites. It won't be the affluent. It's going to be the other end of the economic spectrum that's going to take it in the chops because of this largesse by Joe Biden. Todd, keep up the great work at Center for Immigration Studies, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It is always my pleasure. By the way, I've got a little bit of advice for you. If you're a small business owner, You could probably use a few $100,000, couldn't you? Well, employee retention tax credits, they're an incredible opportunity. Call the experts at Get My Funds. They've been around since the beginning of the pandemic, and they've already helped out about 1,500 small business owners. Maybe they could help you. Those business owners got about $300 million in extra funding. And believe me, Get My Funds knows what they're doing. They have a team of CPAs who specialize in filing for these tax credits, and they're with you every step of the way. Even if there's an audit, they stand behind their work with an audit safeguard. If you retain 5 or more W-2 employees during COVID, even if you already received the PPP, you need to call Get My Funds now at 800-535-2950. It's not a grant, it's not a loan, it's a tax refund. And there are no upfront fees to find out if you qualify. Go with the team you can trust at Get My Funds, 800-535-2950 or getmyfunds.com. That's getmyfunds.com. You're listening to Honestly Provocative Talk Radio and the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's Conspiracy Theory Thursday. I'd love to hear your conspiracy theories. And in a moment, I'll tell you about the National Archives, which seem to have no problem putting the squeeze on Donald Trump for records he was holding, and he was holding, I believe, legally. I understand we're coming up on 1 year since the FBI raid on his home in Mar-a-Lago. And immediately after that raid, what do we hear from the major media? Why, he's expected to be charged with criminal activity any day now. And then, of course, it never happened. So I'll get into that in a moment. First, let's go to Al in Nevada. Hey, Al, welcome to the Lars Larson Show on this Thursday. What's on your mind today? And by the way, if you're listening and you want to jump into the best conversation, we've had some great naysayers today. It's 866-HEY-LARS, and naysayers always go first at 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. Al, what's on your mind?
Well, hey, Lars, just to let you know, I'm a member of the Log Cabin Society, so I'm sure you know what that is. But
yes,
my brother and I were talking about all these, trans. I'm a biological male, and I want to be on the woman team. And then we're like, okay, well, my personal theory, and maybe this might be conspiracy, but I'm just like, okay, maybe you're on the guys' team and you suck. All right, so so hey, I'll identify as a woman, and then I will beat everybody else because biologically I'm going to be stronger 90% of the time than these women. So I'm going to be a faster swimmer, a faster this. And what kind of pathetic ego could they have? Hey, look at the trophy I won from a girl. And what I'm surprised is why aren't the women and why aren't the parents more furious? Here's your daughter who's been training since she was like 5 to be a swimmer or a runner, and in comes this male and wipes it away from her. Now, my brother's theory is that maybe these guys are just pervs and they want to identify as a woman just to get into the female locker room. And, no one can say anything about it because if you are, then, oh, my God, you're trying to wipe the trans population off the face of the earth, all of this. But what I don't understand is why don't you hear about the biological females that want to act like male? Because I'm pretty sure that if you have a woman that identifies as a male, let her go in against the MMA, that Irish Kavanaugh guy, and see how long she stands.
Well, Al, let me give you examples from both sides, because I've literally talked about this for years. And I was asking the same question you were years ago. Where are the mothers and fathers, grandmothers and grandfathers who are so proud of their kids or grandkids, and they do so well at track or at volleyball or at basketball or any of these other sports, which, by the way, are not just sports. They are a path to be able to get a free or paid for college education for many, many people. Exactly. People who get scholarships for all kinds of things. And I'll give you examples from both the male and the female side. The parents have been largely silent, and so have the athletes. And I think I can tell you why. In most institutions today, if you raise a voice and you object to the transgender policy, you're going to find yourself off the team. You're going to find yourself shunned and pushed to the side, and that means you're not going to get anywhere because the coach knows that he or she keeps his or her job by going along with what the woke folks up in the front office of the school district are telling them to do. So if they have a teammate, an athlete who stands up and objects, say this is wrong, male or female, that the coach is going to get heat, so they boot them off the team. That's problem number one. Now, as to the male-female, the males and ones that were biological males that now present as a female, say I identify as female, they're always going to have an advantage. And I had to explain this to somebody the other day who said, well, but they've been taking hormones. I said, talk to any doctor, look at the studies. The fact that you spent the first 12, 14, 16 years of your life until you transitioned as a male gives you an inherent built-in advantage. You will do better. I've also pointed out that, Al, do you know when men broke the 1 minute mile in track and field?
Was it in the 60s or 70s?
It was in the 50s. It was in the 50s, and men are now well under 4 minutes to do the mile, so they get better. Wow. The women have done better, too. Do you know when the women broke the 4 minute mile? It's a trick question.
I think it was the 80s.
No,
yeah,
never.
I know, it's a trick question.
Never,
they haven't
never,
broke the
never. I think they're at 4:09. Now, I don't follow track and field that closely, but I looked them up. So you have women who will never be able to beat. Well, they may, but if men did it in the 50s, and what was that, Donovan? Because I thought my executive producers, 4:12 is where women are right now. So if you say, well, you can imagine that a woman runner would say, if I become the first woman to, I think it was Roger Bannister, I think it was the one who broke the 4 minute mile. If you say, I become the first woman to break the 4 minute mile, and we have better training techniques today than we've ever had in history. We have young men and women who are very well trained. They're very well qualified. They're running on great shoes and great tracks, and they know all the tricks, like living in an oxygen deprived environment. Nike experimented with that for a while. If women are still at 4:12, what is the likelihood that in the next 50 years any woman will beat the 4 minute mile? And yet men are routinely able to run a sub 4 mile. The same thing is true in swimming and other sports. So there are different advantages in sports. There was one woman that we talked about, and I don't have her name in front of me, but she was a female, now presents to society as a male. I believe she was on the Harvard swim team. And she decided, because she was a swimmer, but she said she now identifies as male, she switched over to the Harvard swim team. She was on the swim team for a very short period of time. She failed out because she couldn't keep up with the men. Even though as a woman, she was a top flight athlete. But against men, I've had friends of mine who said, one who threw, I think, javelin and shot put in college. I didn't do any sports in college, and I was only there a year and a half. But he said, Lars, I could hit women's records in shot put and javelin, and he says, so he'd look at the records and say, wow, I threw one that far, but that's against women. Against women, he'd win all day long. So there's that advantage. It always works in the male's favor. So we've had decades of hearing women and women's advocacy groups say, you have to give women an equal shot. And now what we've told women is you can be replaced by a guy in a dress. And I'm stunned, too, that NOW, National Organization for Women, and all these other advocacy groups are staying absolutely silent. And why? Because their politics are liberal politics. They will not stand up and object. They are fraudulent organizations now, because when NOW says we are the national organization for women, and women are being displaced by males who identify as women, that's going to hurt an awful lot of women. It basically makes the whole Title IX argument that we should afford equal opportunity to both genders. It turns the whole thing into a joke. And frankly, there's a lot of money to be made in handing out those hormones and doing the surgeries. There is literally billions of dollars available, and the medical establishment, they're cleaning up big time, and I think they are a fraud as well. Thanks for the call. By the way, if aging muscles and joints are slowing you down, do what I did. Lars here for Gen Pop Extra Strength CBD Cream from Generic CBD. Folks, this stuff's amazing. It's guaranteed to work or your money back. Rub it in to your knees, your elbows, your shoulders, and your back, and especially your hands. It melts right into muscle and joints, and it goes to work fast. Plus, it's a great moisturizer. My wife and I love it. It's from our friends at Generic CBD, where you can save up to 72% on CBD. It's not sold in stores yet, but my listeners can get a trial-size bottle, 10 treatments for just $9.95. Now, that is a $20 value, and it's not a subscription. And the shipping, by the way, included in the price, it's free. To order, go to rubitin.com. That's rubitin.com, or call 740-RUB-IT-IN. That's 740-RUB-IT-IN. These products and statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. Coming up in just a moment, one of our favorite investigative reporters, John Solomon from JustTheNews.com. We're going to talk about the FBI and whether we should just take the whole place apart and bulldoze it. You're listening to Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. Should the FBI be dismantled following its failure to comply with a congressional subpoena and turn over documents involving the Biden crime family? It says bad things, I think, about both the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which I have no faith in at this point. It also says bad things about Joe Biden and the rest of his family, but we'll get to those a bit later. John Solomon joins me now, political commentator and founder of JustTheNews.com that breaks some of the biggest stories in this country. I highly advise you check it out as we do every day. John, welcome back.
Welcome. Good to be with you.
So America First Legal said we've got a bunch of emails that it got showing that Hunter Biden advised his father's office during his vice presidency, despite all of Joe's protests to the contrary, or lies, as I would like to call them.
It's just more evidence of what we've been putting out for the last couple of years. Let's remember that one of the first things that I uncovered from the laptop was an email from 2014 when Joe Biden was making his first speech in Ukraine after he was appointed by President Obama to be the Ukraine policy person. That very week that Joe Biden's going over there, Hunter gets put on the Burisma board, the energy company. That's the one that's been in the controversy now for many years. And there's a line in the vice president's speech that says, we're going to go and get more natural gas exploration in Ukraine. And Hunter Biden and his colleagues write that they got that line in the vice president's speech and that they should take credit for it with their new paying client, Burisma. Hunter Biden had access to state dinners. He was talking to the staff all the time. As I approved with a FOIA I got a couple of years ago, he was meeting with Deputy Secretary Tony Blinken. Now our secretary, he was all over the Biden administration, constantly giving advice, constantly pitching his clients to them. The America First Legal just further validates how widespread this relationship was. There is no truth to what Joe Biden or Hunter Biden have told us about the cross-pollination. It was going on all the time.
Yeah, and given that, I mean, you know why at least I suspect, and you tell me if there's evidence to back this up, the reason the FBI is resisting letting this information out to Congress, which has the authority and the responsibility of oversight, but the authority to demand this information, is because it all traces right back to Joe, doesn't it?
Well, there's probably even a bigger problem for them. Let's just think about what we lived through a couple of weeks ago, right? The John Durham report points out that while they went after Donald Trump without an iota of evidence, there wasn't a single piece of corroborated evidence at any point from opening to close of the Russia collusion investigation. They had 4 investigative leads on Hillary Clinton in the middle of the 2016 election. They shut all 4 of them down. That is in addition to the email case, which we now know Comey wrongly shut down. You see this dual system. Democrats got protected. Republicans got investigated without cause. But here's what we're going to find out about this confidential human source lead that the FBI got in the summer of 2020. You're going to find out in the documents that I'm going to make public next week that the FBI shut that down, and you're going to laugh when you hear the excuse. Somebody in the FBI wrote a memo saying, oh, this might be Russian disinformation. If that doesn't sound familiar.
Wow.
By now we can almost laugh about it. So what is the FBI really worried about? It isn't about Joe Biden. It's about the fact that once again, they're going to be shown to have shut down an investigation of a Democrat without good basis.
Well, what would be the way to bust this loose right now? Should Congress, instead of starting by impeaching Mayorkas or impeaching others or Joe Biden himself, should they start with Christopher Wray, haul him up in front, or other top officials at the FBI and say, we believe that you have turned this in the investigative agency, allegedly, into a political weapon, and that's illegal, it's wrong, and we're not going to tolerate it, and impeach somebody high up in the FBI?
Yeah, listen, that's a possibility. Another one is to defund them, right? A lot of people are saying, hey, we're going to take Chris Wray's salary away from him. If he wants to work for free, let him. We're also going to tell him he can't take the jet anymore to his home in Atlanta. I think there are a lot of punishments that the Republicans, now that they got the debt deal out of the way, are going to start to exact using the power of the purse. The first step will be finding them in contempt. Today, James Comer acknowledged that he's drafted the articles for contempt and that they will vote on that as early as next week. But the real thing that hurts the FBI is money. They build kingdoms, right? They want a new FBI headquarters. It's going to cost a couple $2 billion. I think this Congress is going to kill that project. They may kill some of the salaries. They may kill James Comey's retirement from the Justice Department. There are many things that now could potentially
can they do that to Comey?
They can.
I mean, because
they can.
Can
Power of the purse. All they
Wow.
have to say is he may have earned his thing, but this Congress will not authorize the payment of that, and that'll end up in court. And we'll have to see where the court comes down on that. But the power of the purse for the House is absolute.
Well, see, I guess what I wonder about is in terms of punishing the folks at the top, like Ray, with the jet or the paychecks or paychecks to Comey, who's already done the damage. How deep does the rot go in the agency? Because, John, this agency has been notorious for having problems for decades. You know, under its former longtime director, and then yet at other times in history, is the rot so deep that we just have to shut the entire agency down? And is there a need to rebuild it?
That is a great question. And people who used to say, oh, that's too extreme, are now gravitating towards that. Listen, at the end of the day, that's a policy and opinion question. I want to stay in the facts. But what is the facts? A couple of years ago, it was pretty clear that the top echelons, you know, the people like an Andy McCabe or a Pete Strzok at the high levels of, you know, section chiefs and up, it seems to be creeping downward. But at the same time it's creeping downward, the number of people blowing the whistle is starting to increase. And I think that becomes a collision point where the leadership of the FBI realizes, wait, our own people don't trust us anymore. That can lead to the sort of institutional change that maybe politics can't force. Sometimes you just become so dysfunctional inside, you stop and say, we got to fix this. I think that moment is coming.
Well, God bless those people who've had the courage to come forward and have their lives destroyed. But at some point, if enough whistleblowers say, if there are enough of us, they can't go after all of us at the same time, it'll be too transparent. That's John Solomon, the man behind JustTheNews.com. Hey, are you a small business owner who could use a few $100,000 extra dollars? Well, employee retention tax credits, they're an incredible opportunity for you. You should call the experts at GetMyFunds.com. They've been around since the beginning of the pandemic, and they've already helped out 1,500 small business owners to get about $300 million in funding. And they know what they're doing. They have a team of CPAs who specialize in filing those tax credits, and they're with you every step of the way. Even in the event of an audit, they stand behind their work with an audit safeguard. If you retained 5 or more W-2 employees during COVID, and even if you already got the PPP, you know, the Paycheck Protection Plan, you need to call my GetMyFunds.com right now. 800-535-2950. It's not a grant. It's not a loan. It is a tax refund. And there are no upfront fees to find out if you qualify. Go with a team you can trust at GetMyFunds.com. 800-535-2950 or GetMyFunds.com. That's GetMyFunds.com. Send your emails to talk@LarsLarson.com and tell Alexa to play The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's Conspiracy Theory Thursday, and it won't surprise you one little bit that Joe Biden has fallen off the stage while giving a speech. Now, it looks like it was a pretty hard tumble. We'll get details on whether or not the president suffered any kind of serious injuries. It doesn't appear so at this moment, but I thought I'd let you know about that. Now you understand why they're keeping Joe in the basement or a bunker most of the time. And does that mean I wish the president of the United States ill? It does not at all. But I'm suggesting to you that this man is not physically or mentally capable of being president. I just throw it in because that is the latest news that we've got at this hour. But I want to tell you about something that has happened involving concrete workers in the city of Seattle, their labor union, a destructive labor union, and a United States Supreme Court decision that came down today 8-1. Only the nitwit on the court voted against this decision. It essentially said that if you're in a union and you represent workers and that you tell those workers to go on strike, if the way that they go on strike actually destroys some of the equipment owned by the company they work for, and they destroy the equipment by their actions on their way out the door during a strike, the U.S. Supreme Court says, no, you do not get permission as a labor union, nor do you as a union member to go out and destroy the company's equipment by your actions during a strike. And I don't mean throwing rocks at windshields. I have with my own eyes seen unionized teachers throw rocks at windshields and curse at people and everything else. I'm talking about far more destructive activity than that. It involves a union strike in Seattle that happened about 6 years ago, and they've been fighting ever since. And finally, the Supreme Court, in a decision that included both 2 of the liberal justices and the other 6, including the not-so-conservative John Roberts, have said, no, just because you're in a union doesn't mean you can destroy equipment on the way out the door. So let me get into the details of that in just a moment. First, welcome to the Lars Larson Show, and welcome to the Radio Northwest Network, proudly serving the Pacific Northwest states of Oregon and Washington and Idaho for the last 23 and a half years. And if you want to join what we call the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every weekday at 866-HEY-LARS. And if you're a naysayer, why, we put you right to the head of the line. You're more than welcome. You get to go first if you decide that my point of view or the things I say don't make sense to you and you want to call me out, feel free to do it. 866-439-5277. You can send your emails to talk@larslarson.com, and you can answer our Twitter poll. And I'm going to make this very plain. We have Republican senators, state senators in the state of Oregon, and they have walked out of the legislature, so they're denying a quorum. Without a quorum, the Senate can't vote on anything. That means the House can sit over there and pass things and spin their wheels as long as they want. None of that stuff is going to get voted on in the Senate. None of it is going to end up on Tina Kotek's desk. And Governor Tina Kotek had a meeting with some of the Republican leadership, and they told her what was wrong. They said they have a number of complaints because there is, in fact, a requirement in the state of Oregon that all legislation must be written in a way in which the people can understand it. Now, you could get into an argument about how complicated a bill could be and the average person could still understand it. There are bills being introduced by Democrats, and I'm going to mention one of them in particular, that even the people who wrote the bill don't know what was in it. Now, if they can't understand it and they wrote it, I would guess the average voter, the average citizen, is not going to have the first clue about it. I know I won't. So, because they've walked out, the Senate is shut down. That effectively shuts down all legislation, which is fine with me, because the bill they're objecting to in particular, which they brought up to Tina Kotek's face, and they said, listen, Governor, you've got to change this bill, amend it, or you've got to kill the bill. And she said no. So, I'm going to ask you in the Twitter poll before I tell you what the bill is about. Should Oregon state senators return to the legislature or kill the rest of the legislative session? I vote at this point with Tina Kotek's intransigence. I vote in favor of killing the rest of the legislative session. So we've given you 2 options, return to Salem or kill the session. I vote for kill the session. Today's Twitter poll is brought to you by Ultimate Truck Services. If you rely on trucks for business, Ultimate keeps your biggest assets on the road and running right. Find them at ultimatetruckservice.com. Now, what is the bill that has Oregon Republican senators having walked out of the Senate and denied the Senate the operation that they would ordinarily be in? It is House Bill 2002, already passed by the House. Tina Kotek is licking her chops, just saying, I want to sign this bill. And the 3 most significant things it does that I think you should understand, because I've mentioned it before. House Bill 2002 allows people at your kid's school or social workers or anybody who works for government to help your 10 or 11 or 12-year-old daughter or 13 or 14-year-old daughter get an abortion at age 10 or lower. Okay, an abortion at age 10. And the law says you, as a parent, have no right to know that it's happening. You have no say in whether or not your 10 or 11-year-old daughter even gets an abortion. And the Democrats are solidly behind that. Governor Kotek has said she will not agree to modify that bill or ask her friends in the legislature to modify that bill. Number 2, It says that the school or counselors or others can help to arrange chemical castration, puberty blockers, for your teenage son to turn him into a girl without your knowledge, without your consent as parents. And number 3, double mastectomies or puberty blockers to forever change your daughter's life without your knowledge and without your consent. Now, I'd love to talk to a naysayer who says, yeah, abortions for 10-year-olds, chemical castrations for teenage boys, double mastectomies for teenage girls, all of that is perfectly okay, and parents have no say in it. I haven't had a naysayer who's willing to advance that crazy position yet. But before we hit the break, I want to tell you about this decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. I've told you before, I don't want to be in a union. I have been in one before. I didn't like it. I got one of them decertified and put out of business, at least as far as representing me and my coworkers. I don't want to join a union ever. I want you to have that choice. In Oregon and Washington, we are not right-to-work states, which means if you come to a unionized workplace, you have to join. Now, we're talking about a company called Glacier. Glacier makes concrete and delivers it to construction sites. The union that represents their drivers, about 6 years ago, the drivers were told, walk off the job. Do you know what happens when you take a concrete truck that is already full of concrete and you just leave it sitting there spinning? Even if the truck is, the big drum, the barrel on it is spinning, the concrete hardens inside. You have to dump thousands of dollars. Concrete, I think, is about $130 a square yard. It ain't cheap. They have to dump all the concrete, and if they don't dump it soon enough, the barrel on the truck is destroyed and the company is out of business. And of course, the people waiting for that concrete, the customers of the company, are harmed as well. Well, the union says we have a right to do that. And what the company, Glacier Northwest, or Cal Portland, is the parent company, is known. Cal Portland said, you have a right to be unionized. You do not have a right through your union strike to destroy our equipment. And guess what? The U.S. Supreme Court agreed in an 8-1 vote, and only Ketanji Brown Jackson, that's right, the Supreme Court justice who can't define what a woman is, and she's a woman, she's the only one who voted no on that. Back in a moment, it's Conspiracy Theory Thursday. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. I was a reporter for about 20 years, and it makes me embarrassed to see what journalism has turned into today, because one of the biggest conspiracies in American history, one of the biggest frauds, involves a group called Black Lives Matter, otherwise shorthanded as BLM, where tens of millions of dollars was raised, where an awful lot of the money ended up spent on fancy houses and big salaries for the higher-ups at BLM. And you'd think a major league scandal like that would draw a gigantic amount of attention from the press corps, but it really hasn't. So I thought we'd talk about it with Daquan Bruce, who's the executive director of Concerned Communities for America, a 501c3, that's the IRS designation for a nonprofit committed to promoting traditional values in minority communities. He's also a survivor of a drive-by shooting in Chicago. Daquan, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
So what should we make of the fact that BLM is out there, I guess, still raising money, a lot less this year than last year, but it's still tens of millions of dollars, and nobody seems interested in saying, hey, let's track down these folks who seem to have put most of this money to their own personal luxury?
You are absolutely right in the fact that we should be disappointed in that, and more so outraged in the lack of media attention on the reality that the money that was, given to this organization by people from all around the world, corporations even, with the hopes of supporting families who have very, real tragedies to deal with, that money was used to enrich the lives of a small group of people who are ultimately, self-serving, serving more as a slush fund, as opposed to an actual charity.
I mean, the other thing is, Daquan, my wife and I give money to charity, and if we ever found out that a charity, maybe a religious charity or a political charity or a political organization, had misused our money this badly, we'd be demanding it back. And yet I don't hear any kind of drumbeat from corporate America saying, hey, we handed you a few $1 million. Turns out you stole it, used it on your own fun times. We'd like the money back. But are American corporations just afraid to say anything bad about BLM?
Well, one, yes, many corporations, have this fear of kind of poking the bear, if you will. Last year, CCA, we undertook our campaign where we called out the corporations who funded BLM and specifically their agenda towards defunding the police. And what we came to find out is that many of these corporations, oftentimes their personnel who's in charge of their philanthropic giving are individuals who are sympathetic to the causes that BLM, supports. And then, in addition to that, these are individuals who have personal support for things such as cultural Marxism, which BLM supports, as well as a sort of a push toward anarchy, in our streets as their way of, remedying the harms and situations that are present in our country. So when you have people like that being in control of the purse of many of these corporations, of course they're not going to ask for their money back. Of course they're not going to, make a big deal about BLM's misgivings, because, at the end of the day, they are in lockstep with what this organization has been doing.
Well, in Daquan, when BLM first came on the scene, I went to some of the protests and, walked up and said, I'd like to talk to some of you. I do a radio show. I'd like to, you can put your views out in front of everybody. They always flatly refused. But I went to their website, and sure enough, just like you said, they said, we are a Marxist organization. But more shocking than that, they said, we oppose the nuclear family. I'm like, hold on a second. If there's anything that might help keep mostly young men out of trouble, it's the nuclear family. It's having mom, dad, uncles, grandpa, grandma, all the other, cousins and everything else who would say, hey, let's steer this kid in the right direction so he doesn't get into trouble. Mostly young men. There may be some young women as well. And you think an organization that opposes the nuclear family is practically setting people up, whether they're black, white, or otherwise. It's setting them up for failure, isn't it?
Absolutely. BLM has only made life worse for now. I won't even just say just black Americans, but for all Americans as a whole. This is an organization whose inflammatory rhetoric has led to, violent and destructive riots all over America. The defund the police movement has increased crime, and they have encouraged very reckless behavior on behalf of those who support their organization. Everything from, overtly going against one's family, but then also, openly going against faith and other foundational values that are critical to the development of our youth. If these companies that support BLM have any, shred of respect and dignity for the communities that they serve in, then they should be standing up and saying that this is not okay, and demanding transparency and demanding refunds from this organization.
See, Daquan, you've hit on that point when you mentioned that at these companies, these woke big corporate companies that give out tens of millions of dollars to various charities, you say these are people who care about helping out the community. And maybe they say it's their community. But let's say they say we really care about people in the black community, and we're black and we work at Nike or we work at some other big corporation, we've got money to throw around. I would think they'd be the most outraged to say you took the money and bought a fancy mansion instead of you took the money and helped people get out of poverty or get a job or avoid going into a life of crime. I would think they'd be even madder than I am.
Yeah, I mean, logically they should be. But once again, we go back to, take the most recent incident with Target and how they are pushing this transgender LGBTQ views on children. Well, look at the individuals who are leading that charge. They are individuals who sit on one gentleman sat on an organization that forced and pushes transgenderism on kids in middle school, and that was in his free time. So of course his logic and his activity and his job will follow. And you have many individuals, may not be to that extreme, but who follow these same types of logic, these same types of reckless behavior in their personal lives. And so they carry that over into the corporate world, thinking that they're doing the country and the world some type of service. But in reality, we're really hurting our communities and hurting the people who are most vulnerable in our communities.
Well, Daquan, I can't, it's hard for me to wrap my head around how you say, okay, not you, but when they say, we're going to go out to families, families of color especially, and say, okay, we're going to go to black families and say, hey, we're going to provide a swimsuit for your son. So when he wants to tuck his private parts away, he can pretend to be a girl. Now, for the woke crowd and the PC crowd, they may say, oh, yeah, we're totally in favor of that. But for the average, do you think the average black family says, oh, yeah, Dad says, I can't wait for the day when I'll take my kid down to the public pool, he'll tuck his privates away, and he can go swimming and act like a girl. Do you think there are a lot of black families that embrace that idea?
Not in the slightest. Not in the slightest bit. People now deem it as deem it as toxic masculinity. But when I was growing up, there was a very real view of how men should be. Men should be men. Men shouldn't be afraid to be a man. You shouldn't be afraid, if your private parts, swing a little bit. You shouldn't be afraid if you got a deep voice and you got hair in places, that you aren't used to. Those things were physical indicators of your biological nature that was given to you by God.
Absolutely right. That's Daquan Bruce, Executive Director of Concerned Communities for America. Daquan, thank you very much. If aging muscle and joints are slowing you down, use what I use. Lars here for Gen Pop Extra Strength CBD Cream from Generic CBD. Folks, this stuff's amazing. It's guaranteed to work or your money back. Rub it into your knees, elbows, your shoulder and back, and especially your hands. It melts right into your muscles and joints, and it goes to work fast. Plus, for me, it's a great moisturizer. My wife and I love it. And it's from our friends at Generic CBD, where you can save up to 75% on CBD. It's not yet sold in stores, but my listeners can get a trial-size bottle of 10 treatments for just $9.95. That's a $20 value. It's not a subscription, and shipping is free. To order, go to rubitin.com. That's rubitin.com or call 740-RUB-IT-IN. That's 740-RUB-IT-IN. These products and statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'll get back to your phone calls shortly. Just stick with me. But I want to talk about something I think is very, very important, and that is we're in the middle of what the LGBTQ plus crowd calls Pride Month. Except it's taken on an entirely different significance in this 1 year, especially because we watch major corporations load up on all kinds of woke policies. Target is sending itself over a financial cliff by telling parents, hey, here's some swimsuits for girls that actually have a little extra area for your little boy to tuck away his private parts, and he can pretend to be a girl. And then you've got Anheuser-Busch with its Bud Light disaster with Dylan Mulvaney. And, of course, Disney, which continues to go over a cliff financially and otherwise by taking its signature crowd of customers, parents and children, and saying you matter less than actually showing Disney's support for LGBTQ+. So I wanted to talk to Roger Severino, who oversees the Betsy DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society at Heritage, about what's going on at Princeton. Mr. Severino, welcome back to the program.
Glad to be back.
Tell me this. Princeton was not my first choice, wouldn't have been my first prediction of a place where you'd actually see a member of the faculty, a full-on professor, say, I'm going to stand up and do something about some of the excesses of Pride Month. What's happened there?
Well, this is not just any professor. This is the inestimable Robert P. George. Robbie George has been the sanest voice in the culture, and especially in academia, fighting the good fight for marriage and family, for unborn life. He's a true hero. And if you've never heard of him, then you haven't been paying enough attention, because he is one of the outstanding voices for reason in an insane age and world.
So what is he specifically doing, saying, I'm going to do something that flips Pride Month right on its head, as you've said?
It's genius counter-programming. It's Fidelity Month. And he said, you know what? There are flags, there are symbols, there are month celebration. Let's go back to basics, do some counter programming, and celebrate fidelity to God, to family, to country. These are timeless principles that everybody should be able to get behind. Even secular folks should be able to see the value in fidelity to those principles. We have such a massive decline in belief and support of faith, of the institution of family, and even in patriotism nowadays. And we're seeing this illness around the country. Suicide rates are off the charts, depression, loneliness, drug abuse, the fentanyl crisis. petty crimes. It's just a breakdown upon breakdown that we're seeing everywhere. And part of the solution is returning to the values of proper fidelity to what was part of our founding principles. God, family, and country. And those things have been under attack by the woke left. You mentioned some of the corporations that have gone full bore on the woke agenda. And if you go woke, for the first time in a long time, you're going to go broke. And you've had so many people push back. And you didn't mention the Dodgers, which is perhaps the most offensive.
I should have, because openly disparaging the Catholic faith, it just seems like an open invitation to get taken down, even by a very woke news media, to say, okay, you've gone too far. To have people dressed up, transgender people dressed up as nuns and mocking one of the world's three big religions seems especially foolish. But like you said, it's a world kind of gone crazy right now.
Yeah, just imagine if they had dressed like, I don't know, Muhammad, and what the media reaction would be to that. In drag, right? What would the reaction be from the media? But if it's done against Catholics, you get a pass. No, you don't. They do some vile displays specifically designed to offend and ridicule nuns who are the best among us. That's their goal, and they're being platformed by a Major League Baseball team. I grew up in LA, and I'm ashamed of the fact that the team that I grew up with, Fernando Valenzuela, and now they're doing this for what? It's not to please their fans. That's what doesn't make any sense, is that they would go to this extreme, out of their way to offend, and they're doing it knowing, and it's undeniable. It's just, unless you're of a certain age, I don't recommend you actually Google this group. But if you were to Google and see the pictures, you will be offended.
And guaranteed that when you mock people's faith or religion, it's always been dangerous territory, and should have been. I mean, because people's faith my faith is very important to me. I'm a Protestant Christian, but I don't, and even though I have big theological differences with the Catholic faith, I say, but you have a right to your faith, and you have a right not to be mocked for it. And when Professor George says, let's honor fidelity, that seems like something that even the LGBTQ plus crowd would say, well, we can't be against that, because I know people who are in coupled relationships who are gay or lesbian or otherwise, and you think, okay, they appreciate fidelity. It's almost an unassailable kind of stance to take. We're in favor of fidelity to country, to patriotism, to faith, and perhaps even to the person that you are a part of a couple with, although your couple is not one that's going to be well received in certain quarters. Okay, but you can at least honor fidelity. So what's been the reaction to Professor George's effort?
Well, if you know anything about Professor George's background, he's been stalwart in fighting for the natural understanding of marriage as a union of one man and one woman, and he's gone to the mat for that, and in briefs before the Supreme Court, et cetera, because that is what leads to the greatest human flourishing. And fidelity to that original vision is what is being under attack, right? That is what has been under attack for quite a long time, saying that that's a norm that should be dismantled. And yes, we could rage against the decay of what we see around us, starting with no-fault divorce and online to the redefinition of marriage. But Professor George's vision is not just opposition, but a positive vision of what fidelity looks like. If we restore faith in God, if we restore faith in husbands and wives and raising children, and being there, being present, being faithful to those marriage vows, and if we also restore a faith in our community, which is represented in, a healthy patriotism and love of country. Right? There was a Wall Street Journal poll that showed there's been massive declines in all of those three factors: fidelity to faith, to family, and to country. And that is catching up with us now. And some of the disorder we saw over the last few years, and the despair and the suicides, that's the result of this crisis of faith and crisis of confidence in what America has always been about. And Fidelity Month will help restore that. It's a positive vision of what we should be doing as a nation.
I think it's a great. Roger, I've got a theory that I've pitched for 25 years, and nobody gets on board with me. But my theory is that marriage or something like marriage, no matter what you called it, has been present in every single human society for 10,000 years. And people say, well, it's about religion. I said, not always, but it's present in every human society. And it's the bedrock of the foundation of communities, of towns, of families, that's the bedrock. And the government got involved in marriage, as near as I can tell, about 170 or 180 years ago, and said, we're going to determine marriage and who can do it and where and why, and especially in the United States. And it's been downhill ever since. It's been a solid institution for 10,000 years. And then it began to fall apart the minute the government got its mitts on it and people started to inject politics into family and marriage. I think that's where it went. But that's Roger Severino. He oversees the DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society at Heritage. Roger, thank you very much. We'll be back in a moment. I'll get to your phone calls and emails. It's Conspiracy Theory Thursday, and I might even have a naysayer coming up. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'll be glad to get to your phone calls and emails in a moment. But I got to tell you what's happened today, because first, do I have a dog in the fight? I went to college for a year and a half. I paid for it with my own money. Have I ever taken out any loans for higher education or other kinds of education? No, I have not. Do I think that it's okay to take out loans for your higher education or trade school or whatever it is you want to do? Absolutely right. But at that point, you're deciding what to buy. And when you go to the government, and because the government makes the vast majority of those loans now, or at least backed them up in the past, and now Joe Biden wants to take literally hundreds of billions of dollars and give them away. And most of those dollars came from people who never sat in a college classroom. They don't have the benefit of the college education that you were able to access. And then you turn around and say, hey, I went off and got this really stupid degree. And by that, I define a stupid degree as one that doesn't lead to a paying job that would allow you to pay it back. For example, borrow a bunch of money, become a nurse. Nurses start as an RN out of school at about $60,000, $65,000 a year. And you can make even more if you get more training. I use that as an example. My mom was an RN, and these days they pay RNs a gigantic amount of money, but it's commensurate with the training you have and the costs you may have incurred. So if a young lady or a young man becomes a nurse and says, well, I'm making about $6,000 a month, maybe $5,800 a month, can you afford $500 a month to pay for your education? Was that a good deal? Yeah, great deal. Now, does anybody want to pay that money back? No, nobody wants to pay their bills, but you're the one who decided to get that education. On the other hand, if you went to a college, like a state college, and you got a degree in, I don't know, philosophy, beetle tracking, button sorting, underwater basket weaving, and then you said, hey, turns out there's not much need for people with degrees in underwater basket weaving, and now I find myself with this gigantic loan payment that I don't want to pay off. I understand how you feel, but it was your decision to put yourself in that spot. So Joe Biden, during his presidential campaign, mostly from his basement at his house in Delaware, where he stored illegal classified documents and where his coked-up son Hunter liked to hang out when he wasn't out impregnating strippers or getting himself high on cocaine, Joe Biden promised, I will make sure that we get a lot of those student loans just flat erased. Well, you don't just erase them. You mean the student who got the benefit of the education no longer has to pay for it, and somebody else does, meaning every other taxpayer in America has to pay that additional cost. That's where the rub comes in. So guess what? The United States Congress has decided to say no to Joe Biden's student loan debt giveaway program, the one that promises to cost at least $500 billion. There's about $1.7 trillion in total student loan debt in America. He wants to take about a third of it and just say the students who got the benefit no longer have to pay for it. It'll be paid for instead by a bunch of you who never got to go to college. And if anybody thinks that's fair, I'd be glad to take the naysayer call, saying, oh, it's perfectly fair that this poor kid who got the button sorting or beetle tracking degree and found out his only job was serving coffee at Dutch Bros or at Starbucks, well, too bad. he still has to pay it. Or if somebody wants to argue it's perfectly fair to tell the average working Steph who didn't get a chance to go to college, you have to pay for this young man or young woman who went off to college, had a good time, went to some keggers, went to some tailgaters, went to some ball games, and had homecoming weekend and all the fun stuff. But you get to pay for their bill. And by the way, you also get to pay for all the lattes they had and the cool Apple Mac laptop that they had and all the rest of that. You pay the bill. Well, the Congress, even a bipartisan effort by both Republicans and Democrats. So in the House of Representatives, where that bill started to block Joe Biden's student loan giveaway, the House voted 218 to 203. Now, if you follow the numbers on Capitol Hill, that's significant. The Republicans have an edge of about 5 votes in the House of Representatives, but they got 15 votes more than they usually would have. There's 15-vote margin to pass a measure, and there were 2 Democrats who said, nope, we're not voting. We're voting for the bill to block Joe Biden. So it went through the House. And you say, well, of course it went through the House. That's under the control of the Republicans. But what happened when it got to the Senate? Well, in the Senate, there was about a 10% margin. The final vote to say yes to the bill was 51 to 46. And that was the Senate, where Democrats hold the majority. So you say, you mean Democrats got behind this? Yep, Democrats and Republicans. Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia voted for it. He's a Democrat. John Tester of Montana, also a Democrat. Senator Kristen Sinema, who's officially an independent but was a Democrat. All 3 of them voted for the bill instead of voting against it. So what you have, and I know the mainstream media is not going to sell it to you this way, is Joe Biden had this crazy idea to pay off this debt, meaning not to pay it off, but to simply shift the debt from the students who took on the debt and got the education to a bunch of people who didn't take on the debt and didn't get the education, who are going to be told you're going to pay the bill instead. And Republicans and Democrats in the House of Representatives said no to that. Senators, both Democrats and Republicans, said no to that. And now it's headed for Joe Biden's desk. And guess what Joe Biden is going to do? He says he's going to veto the bill. Now, remember that Joe Biden is the guy who says, oh, I'll work with both sides and all that. Here, let me quote from some of the coverage of this, because this just came down today. The White House has warned in a statement of administration policy that Joe Biden will veto that resolution. This resolution is an unprecedented attempt to undercut our historic economic recovery and would deprive more than 40 million hardworking Americans of much-needed student debt relief. Well, I would argue with that notion, because I'd say, hold on, is the economic recovery going to stop if Susie and Joe, who went to college for either 4 years or for some period of time and got some level of education, maybe they finished their degree, maybe they didn't, 40 million people got the benefit of some college. And is it really going to stop them from participating in an economic recovery, from working at a job and paying their own damn bill instead of trying to slough it off on a bunch of other Americans who never got to go to college? I don't think so. And I've kind of got a foot in both camps in this sense. I've gone to college. I didn't finish a degree. I did just fine. There are other people who've done exactly that. I didn't ask anybody else to pay the bill. I paid my own bills. And I would ask you as an American, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, if somebody came to you and said, hey, there was this debt taken on by this young man or woman, they got college, maybe they got a degree, maybe they got a year or two of college, it benefited them. They chose the education they wanted to buy. They bought it with money that they owe back, and they would like you to pay the bill. Now, whether you're a liberal or a Democrat, whether you voted for Biden or Trump, are you in favor of putting that debt on a bunch of people who didn't get what the college students got? I would say no, and I would hope you would as well. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show.